All right. Hello, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Transition Ca webinar series. My name is Tom Overton. I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Animal Science at Cornell and also a director of the statewide pro-dairy program. So I'm going to kick it off this week and talk about basics nutrition of the transition cow. So when we think about our goals for successful transitions, right? We want these. We have high expectations. We want these animals to make a lot of milk, calve successfully make a lot of milk. We want to maintain or minimize loss of body condition in early lactation, so no more than half a body score unit or so in early lactation. Of course, we want to see low incidence of metabolic disorders. We want to minimize our loss of amino competence. We want animals that are going to be reproductively capable and so control decreased days for ovulation and have animals that are ready to become pregnant. And of course, we want low stillborn rates and calves that are born alive and ready to thrive. And our high-performing dairies achieve all these things by focusing on continuous improvement in really all areas of transition cow management. And in this series, we're going to cover really all transition cow management pretty comprehensively. And I hope you enjoy what I and the other speakers have to share with you. So I think it's good to reflect here too. We've certainly learned and implemented a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. I think we've made a lot of progress in the transition cow. Nutritional strategies such as DCAD diets, we'll talk about, so cation anion difference, controlled energy diets, focusing on protein supply before calving, and then also fresh cow diets more recently. Those aren't necessarily new, but in terms of research, they're a relatively new topic, and we're learning more there all the time. And, again, I'm not going to talk about it necessarily, but, we've also been very sensitized to the importance of the non-nutritional factors. So stocking densities and grouping strategies and moves, potentially segregating cows and heifers in the transition period if our facilities and management allow for it. And then heat abatement, certainly in the warmer months, is looking to be increasingly important in these animals. We have enhanced on-farm monitoring. We have ways to do blood ketones at the cow level or herd level. Increasingly, herds have rumination collars and tags. So we're getting more real-time information all the time that just help us track health and monitor these animals better. And yet, as much progress as we've made, I think there's still lots of opportunity out there. So what are the key things we got to do? Well, I'm going to start talking today on nutrition, nutritional management. We're going to talk about tight control of macrominerals in the diet fed to cows as they approach calving. We're going to talk about controlling energy intakes, both far off and close up. So that means not too little, not too much, providing sufficient protein amino acids, ensuring the cows consume diets as formulated. And this was really important. So this gets to what happens on the farm, translation of whatever your nutritionist provides you on paper into what is actualized in front of the cows. And feeding management of these diets is absolutely critical, and especially the sorting side. And next week, Dave and Betsy are going to be talking with you more about the feeding management side here. And then again, we tend to focus on ration fermentability during the fresh period. Okay. And again, I think as long as we have enough structure in the rumen, we can feed more fermentable diets and have better health and productivity outcomes in these cows. The non-nutritional side is huge. Lindsay is going to talk with you on this, and so minimizing stressors and potential impact on both physiology and then variation in intake in these groups of cows. And then Rob and others are going to talk about monitoring. So, how do you put monitoring systems in place to identify maybe either individual cow needs or the need for management change at the herd level. So I'm going to talk about just a few things here with the nutrition. I'm going to hit a couple of the big ones. So one of the big ones is calcium. And, of course, we know that cows crank out a lot of calcium in milk. The blood pool is pretty small. And so, she relies on her body to maintain the calcium, or to provide the calcium for her, in order to meet that adaptation at the time of calving. Okay. If we look at blood calcium concentrations in cows, these are from data from a study that we did on looking at DCAD and calcium. You see here that blood calcium levels kind of drop sharply right at or about the day of calving. And then what we want to have happen is we want them to rebound as quickly as possible. Okay, and we'll talk about ways you do that or how you set that up with diet and proper implementation of that diet. But we really want them to rebound as quickly as possible. We're probably less concerned about the drop on the day of calving because that seems to be needed to get her calcium metabolism to fire. So been a lot of work here done on not only clinical, but then also more recently subclinical hypocalcemia. And lots of studies here relating both clinical and subclinical hypocalcemia to impaired health, to lower milk, to poor repro, and then more recently, Daryl Neidham's group at Cornell, but then Jess McCart's, even most recently here with Raf Neves, really have focused on the dynamics of calcium and focusing really on these animals that where their calcium continues to be low, continuing several days after calving, or certainly outside of the first 24 hours. So those are really the cows we're concerned about. And again, if we implement diet strategies appropriately before calving, we can really minimize that. So how might we do it? How do we improve calcium status, postpartum health? There's really two potential options, right? We can either give them calcium at or after calving as, I would say, treatment or prophylaxis. This doesn't prevent hypocalcemia. This would be treatment, or prophylaxis. I know is technically preventive, but the reality is it really doesn't do that. Okay, the only way to really prevent is to look at diet strategies and that close-up diet or prepartum diet. Okay. If you look at supplemental calcium treatment options, again, I'm not a veterinarian, so I'd encourage you to talk these over with your veterinarian. Obviously there's IV calcium, and that provides calcium very rapidly. Certainly for those cows with clinical milk fever, that would be appropriate or indicated. I take my cues on this from Jess McCart, right, who is a veterinarian and works in this area. And Jess would say, and I would agree that, for cows with no clinical signs, certainly unnecessary and actually can be counterproductive. You can actually induce hypocalcemia by giving cows too much calcium, especially rapidly available calcium. Oral boluses, drenches, again, if you got a cow that's down, that's not going to really provide calcium quickly enough. Certainly could be good in supportive therapy, things like that. Probably less likely to get into trouble with calcium boluses, although the data in general would say you might only consider them for older cows. So especially cows second lactation, third lactation and greater. Sub-Q kind of is intermediate, but again, just my caution to you is to have a conversation with a veterinarian. Again, you can overdo calcium administration in fresh cows. So clearly, again, prepartum diet is really the most effective way of preventing postpartum hypocalcemia. The strategy that's been around for a very long time now and is certainly tested and true is to manipulate the dietary cation-anion difference. Okay, so we're talking about minerals in the diet, potassium and sodium as cations, chloride and sulfur as anions, and so that's why we usually try to eliminate our high potassium forages, our alfalfas, grasses that have gotten a lot of manure from at least the close-up diet. We're not so much worried about the far-off diet, but if we're feeding two-group dry cow system, the close-up diet, we're really trying to minimize or eliminate those forages from the diet. So that means we steer it more toward corn silage, straw, grassy hay that hasn't seen much manure. Those generally are lower potassium sources. And then we also may supplement some anions. And so these are chloride and/or sulfur-containing supplements that then shift this DCAD to be more negative. And that, in a nutshell, turns the cow's calcium metabolism on. Okay. The other approach, and it's a little bit of a newer approach, and it's getting some look out there, and it's a distinct or different approach than DCAD, is to actualize a low calcium diet by using a binder of calcium in the diet that decreases absorption. And there's a synthetic zeolite A on the market that does that. So if we look at DCAD, for a long time, I kind of put DCAD approaches that nutrition has taken into three major buckets. The first one here is by feeding low potassium forages and feeds to close-up dry cows. Nothing fancy with anions, pretty basic strategy. And honestly, if you supplement some magnesium, and I tend to favor calcium supplementation, you can prevent clinical milk fever issues pretty well. And we did in the Northeast by this strategy for a long time. The challenge is we don't really prevent the subclinical hypocalcemia all that well, and we're now recognizing that's probably the real prevalent issue that we need to be thinking about. Second bucket here is okay, we're going to feed our low potassium forages, and we're just going to kind of take the edge off with a smaller amount of anionic supplement. Urine pH is how we monitor DCAD implementation, and so you might get the urine pHs down to 7, 7.5, something like that. And then the third bucket here is we're going to go full on, and we're going to feed our low potassium forages, but then we're going to really be more aggressive with the anions in the diet, run the calving DCAD negative, run the urine pHs to 5.5 to 6. And in this case, I think clearly urine pH monitoring is a really important part of this program. And again, because we probably don't want to overdo it, at least not too much anyway. And actually, we ran a study looking at this versus this versus this, and basically, I would categorize as good, better, and then best in terms of both calcium status and also milk yield outcomes. Okay, so we've been very satisfied with if herds can implement a more aggressive DCAD approach with outcomes in that relative to cow health and subsequent productivity. Now, magnesium is also an important mineral to supplement. It's involved in calcium metabolism, and so we supplement magnesium to these cows. And then I tend to favor, again, calcium supplementation, and we're going to run that up if it's a full anionic diet. Okay. So just to show you some data, this is a meta-analysis, and what a meta-analysis is, it's a summary of studies. So this is 42 different studies that have been done over the years with DCAD. Involving about 1,800 cows total. So again, these are controlled studies done at largely at universities. And again, this summarizes the data. So if we look at what they found, they just in this graph, or table, I'm going to show you that this is first calf heifers over here. Been very few studies actually specifically focused on first calf heifers. DCAD, again, we certainly think they respond. There's not as much of a need probably for DCAD and first calf heifers, just they don't have the dynamics in calcium metabolism. And then this would be the multiparous cows. And so this is just modeling the relationships of DCAD. Okay. So if you look at intakes, maybe a slightly negative effect of DCAD on dry matter intake. I will tell you in our experience now with really 2 different studies, or actually 3 different studies looking at DCAD, we have not seen negative effects, but we tend to use the commercial products, and those are better from the intake standpoint. Postpartum intakes tend to be improved with negative DCAD before calving. Milk yield is improved, especially in older cows. Okay, and that's generally what we see as well. And so again, the summary of the data would say, positive responses here. This is in the range of, just to give you some context here, this is in the range of 3 to 4 pounds. In our data, we generally have seen more like 4 to 6 pounds of milk response, with negative DCAD diets fed pre-calving. So one of the things we talked about was urine pH, and again, it's a great monitor not only of DCAD diet implementation, but it's actually for herds that are feeding anions, it's a fantastic monitor of feeding management. And so, in practice, we'd like to see, upwards of 12 to 15 cows. There's really no reason to go beyond that. I would say get as many as you can, depending on herd size, and no more than 15 probably gives you a good idea of where you're at from a herd standpoint. I'd select them randomly, cows that are fed the pre-fresh diet for at least a week, and try to be consistent in time from feed delivery when you do it. Okay, what can you learn? Well, it certainly shows you what is really going on in the cows with that delivered diet. If you eat the average varying week to week, it tells you you've got some ingredient composition changes, forage changes, mixing differences week to week, things like that. If they're more variable, okay, it tells us they're sorting. Okay, so the more variable they are, usually that points towards sorting. And so that brings us back to, we'll talk about this a little bit, but Dave and Betsy will next week, particle size, moisture, overstocking effects on feeding behavior. Okay. So just to summarize DCAD here, you really want to account for macrominerals and forages. What chemistry methods are going to be best? Consistency is really, really important. Okay, consistency, everything related to the dry cow program is important. We want to prevent sorting the diet. That comes back to particle size of the TMR moisture. Sources, commercial products are best. They're certainly most palatable out there, least likely to have negative impacts on dry matter intake. Some of the old anionic salts or the rock-based sources, those tend to be pretty nasty from a palatability standpoint. Something with magnesium, and again, you're using your pH monitor to gauge implementation, and you get your pH is 5.5 to 6. I target a coefficient of variation, which is standard deviation divided by the mean of under 8%. Again, we can talk about that in the discussion if you want. So the other approach is to actualize a low calcium diet by use of a binder. So it's a different way to turn calcium metabolism on, but again, there are some ways to do that out there in the marketplace. So this goes back to stuff that was done about 20 years ago over in Europe, where they determined that cows fed this synthetic zeolite A, which binds calcium and likely phosphorus as well. Had really maintained much higher blood calcium levels post calving. So a few years ago, they came into Canada and they were interested in coming into the US. And so they actually did a study with us at Cornell, where we wanted to look at the synthetic zeolite A fed to cows entering second and greater lactation. So we had about 30 cows per treatment. We fed them the dietary treatment starting 21 days before expected calving. Our control was just a low potassium diet, no added anions. And then the experimental diet had the commercial form of the synthetic zeolite A. Again, it's marketed by a company out of Canada, and targeting 500 grams per day. Okay. So in our hands, these cows, I'll show you the results very briefly. These cows maintained quite nice blood calciums throughout. Okay. We in our study did not see any production increases. We did see some trends for better repro. But really the big effect was on blood calcium. So switching gears to the energy side, energy protein side, our trends the last 50 years, we've largely abandoned the old steam up concept that was promoted back in the 1990s and very early 2000s. We've focused more on controlling energies in these diets. Some of the recommendations you see where they're real low energy, I think those are probably okay for older cows. I think they're too low energy, too bulky for first calf heifers. So what you're going to see from me is maybe a little higher energy recommendation than what you might see in some other places. MP supply, we focus on bypass protein sources to meet that. Again, these are things to talk about with your nutritionist. And again, we're trying to meet but not dramatically exceed energy requirements both far off and close up. So I'm just going to summarize this. Basically, again, far off, the big thing is keeping the energies down. Right. So, and you can do that in a variety of different ways. You can do it with a straw corn silage mix, a hay corn silage mix, the mature haylage can work. We're not worried about potassium in far off diets. So just keep the energies down. Okay. But you want to keep feed in front of the group though, because, again, you don't want to have the haves and have nots within any of these groups and pens. So you're going to kind of fully feed a low energy diet and however you get there. Okay, low energy density diet. Close up, again, I prefer low to moderate energy, especially if the same diet's fed to heifers and older cows. We're going to feed a little higher starch there. We're going to supplement with our bypass protein sources. You see the recommendation for metabolizable protein. We're balanced for the amino acids as well. The data certainly suggests production responses there. And again, we're really going to focus in on our macro mineral relationships there, our vitamins, and our trace elements. So for some herds, I reckon, I do have a strong preference for two-group dry cow systems. I think that it allows you to really get that energy down far off, and I think that's important. I think it allows you to more strategically target things like DCAD, and we'll talk about other nutrients that are probably important in the transition cow, and allows you to target that cost. At the same time, I also recognize that there's lots of herds where it's two-group system is just not going to work. practically. And so they're going to be one group dry cow programs. So what I do in that case is I generally split the difference in terms of energy, kind of feed kind of also on the lower end of my recommended range for protein. Okay, but still should be sufficient for both periods. And then in general, formulate minerals like the close-up diet. Now, a couple of caveats there. In terms of DCAD, I probably would be a little less aggressive if we're feeding across the entire dry period. And I've also never seen, I'm not aware of anybody who's fed the zeolite A, the synthetic zeolite A, for entire dry period. So I guess I would be cautious about that, or frankly, I probably wouldn't do it. So that probably really is a close-up strategy. And I'll just make the point that I think that it's always a bit of a compromise, performance health cost compared to two-group systems, but if the most practical option on some farms, and frankly, if I had a choice between a poorly implemented two-group system and a well-implemented one-group system, we probably win with one group in that particular situation. So again, you're going to make the best solution isn't always the same for every farm. So we've got a lot of things out there too. We can also add to diets, and a lot of research out there that certainly will back that certain nutrients and certain feed additives belong in these transition diets. And I would say both close-up and fresh. Protected choline's been around for a long time now. We did some of the original work there. Helps liver export fat, improves performance. Very consistent responses in controlled research trials to 2 to 4 pounds of milk and going out into lactation. Amino acids we talked about already. Chromium propionate, good data there on energy metabolism, immune function, endometritis. Biotin is a vitamin. It looks to help glucose production in the cow, which is really important to the transition cow. And then our improved trace mineral sources, hydroxys and organics. And so you see some of the things there. People often call these things additives. These things on the top are actually nutrients. Okay, those are nutrients, and we're just delivering them because the transition cow seems to specifically need those. And then additives, so monensin or rumensin, our data, 5 pounds of milk under lactation, less ketosis. Here's our recommendations: yeast culture, yeast products in general, improving rumen function, transition, intake performance, and then if there's any mycotoxin issues in the herd, using some of the additives out there that seem to help mitigate those issues. So again, Lindsay's going to cover a bunch of this, but I want to make a point. Just don't forget about the non-nutritional factors. They're so important. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but stocking densities, considering separating cows and heifers if facilities allow, group changes, heat stress, heat abatement. Okay. And then just to wrap up, right, just to summarize, our key components, right? Nutrition, the macromineral side, energy, protein, amino acids. The feeding management side is I can't emphasize or underemphasize, or I can't overemphasize, sorry, how critical that is. The non-nutritional side is super important, and then putting systems in place to where you can identify, not only what's going on in the cows, but when you got to really think about changing your management. So again, there's my email, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the webinar series, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the series.